In the forgotten village of Eldermist, time was kept not by watches or phones, but by the great clock tower that stood at its heart. For generations, its resonant chimes had marked the hours, a steady, reliable heartbeat for the community. Farmers looked up from their fields at its call, children knew to head home at its sixth evening peal, and lovers met under its face when it struck 8. It was more than a machine, it was the soul of the place. Until it fell silent. It happened not with a crash or a calamity, but with a slow, gradual decline. First, the chime at the half-hour faded, its note dying prematurely. Then, the hourly bells began to sound thin, brittle, and out of tune. Finally, one windless afternoon, after a weak and gasping toll for 3 o'clock, the silence descended. It was profound, unnerving. The village felt suddenly anchorless, adrift in a sea of unmarked time. The clockmaker from the city was summoned. He spent a day inside the tower, among the ancient gears and massive suspended weights. He emerged in grime, shaking his head. "The mechanism is worn," he declared. "The gears are stripped. The mainspring is frail. It's not a matter of repair, but of replacement. The cost would be astronomical. I'm sorry." The village council, a group of pragmatic men and women, debated. Funds were low. The young people were moving away. Perhaps, they reasoned, the Silent Tower was a symbol of progress. They could all use their phones now. The clock tower, they decided, was a relic. It was to be left as it was, a monument to a bygone era. But the silence had a weight that the council had not anticipated. Without the chiming of the hours, the days began to blur. The baker, Mr. Albright, found his bread overproofing or underbaked. Mrs. Hemsley, who had taught the village children for 40 years, would lose track of her lessons, her sense of a school day's rhythm utterly gone. Arguments broke out over missed appointments. The village square, once a place of punctual meetings, felt abandoned. A deep, collective melancholy settled over Eldermist. It was as if the village itself was holding its breath. Ilara was the archivist's granddaughter, a young woman who had returned to Eldermist to care for her ailing grandfather. She had grown up with the clock's chimes as the soundtrack to her summers. The silence felt like a personal loss. While cleaning out her grandfather's study, a man who loved the tower more than anyone, she found a box of old ledgers. They were not accounts of money, but of time. Meticulous records of the tower's maintenance written in the elegant script of the clockkeepers, a role that had died with her great-grandfather. In the margins of the oldest ledger, she found a note. "The heart of the tower is not in the gears, but in the harmony. A single note out of tune weakens the whole. Listen for the silence between the ticks." It was considered nonsense, the romantic musing of a forgotten man, but to Ilara it felt like a clue. That night, under the light of a full moon, she took the heavy iron key and entered the clock tower. Dust motes danced in the moonlight streaming through the louvers. The great mechanism was still, a frozen constellation of brass and iron. It was a corpse. She placed her hand on the largest gear, cold and immovable. Remembering her grandfather's note, she closed her eyes and listened, not with her ears, but with her heart. At first, there was nothing. Then she felt it. A faint, almost imperceptible vibration, a hum of potential. It wasn't the sound of the clock, but the sound of it wanting to sound. The memory of its own music was trapped within the frozen metal. She ran back to her grandfather's house and ransacked his library. She found a thin, handwritten pamphlet titled "On the Sympathetic Resonance of Harmonic Metals." It proposed a radical idea that a perfectly tuned clock, once set in motion, created a harmonic field that sustained itself, its parts working in a kind of silent, energetic agreement. The failure wasn't mechanical, it was musical. The next day, she went to the village blacksmith, a man named Owen, whose family had forged the original bells. She showed him the pamphlet. He was skeptical, but he saw the desperate hope in her eyes and remembered the sound of the bells from his own childhood. It says here the largest bell, the hour bell, has a fundamental tone that resonates with the mainspring. If that tone is dead, the spring loses its will to turn, Owen asked, crossing his massive arms. And how do we resonate a 500-kilogram bell, she said, her eyes alight. We don't strike it, we sing to it. It sounded like madness, but the silence was a louder madness. So that evening, Ilara and Owen gathered the villagers in the square. They explained the theory, and though many frowned in disbelief, the depth of their shared longing was stronger than their doubt. Ilara stood at the base of the tower, facing the silent bell, visible through the louvers. She took a deep breath, found the note from the old records, a low C, and she sang. It was a clear, pure note that hung in the quiet air. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Owen, with his deep, resonant voice, joined her. One by one, the villagers added their voices. The baker, the teacher, the children, the elderly. They weren't trained singers, but they sang with a shared intention, a collective memory of the sound that had once bound them together. They poured their longing for order, for rhythm, for their shared identity into that single, sustained note. The air in the square began to change. It grew thick, charged. Inside the tower, a fine dust sifted from the beams. Then a deep, resonant hum answered them, not from their throats, but from the bell itself. It was a sympathetic vibration, a string plucked on the other side of existence. With a groan of protest that shook the entire structure, the great gear shifted. A tooth engaged. The great pendulum, dormant for months, gave a shudder and then swung. It was a tiny, hesitant movement at first, then another, wider and more confident. And then the clock struck the hour. It was not the old chime, but something new and yet ancient. It was richer, deeper, filled with the memory of the silence it had endured and the human harmony that had broken it. The sound washed over the village, a wave of pure vibrational life. The clock tower never fell silent again. The villagers, led by Ilara and Owen, became its new keepers, understanding now that its time was their time, its heartbeat their own. They had learned that some silences are not empty, but waiting, and that the most powerful music is not just heard, but felt in the soul of a community, a rhythm rediscovered not by fixing a machine, but by remembering how to sing together.